craziest knockouts in women's MMA. Women's MMA is one of the fastest growing female sports. With each passing year, the best female fighters on the planet continue to showcase their elite skills. Over the past 2 decades, we've seen some sensational performances and ruthless knockouts. Join us in this video as we discuss 10 of the craziest knockouts in women's MMA history. Number 10. Zhang Weili vs. Jessica Andrade. In 2019, Zhang Weili faced off against then women's strawweight champion Jessica Andrade in hopes of claiming UFC gold for herself. Weili is known as one of the most dominant and aggressive fighters in women's MMA, and on this particular night, she proved why. In the first minute, Weili brought forth an onslaught that caught Andrade off guard. She dominated the champ from the beginning until the very end, which was just 40 seconds into round 1. A flurry of shots forced the champ to retreat backwards across the canvas, and as Weili pursued, she dropped Andrade to the ground. It was a brutal knockout and a dominant performance for the Chinese fighter. Number 9. Holm vs. Bethe Correia. Back in June of 2017, we got to see a prime example of what can go wrong when fighters decide to taunt their opponents in the middle of the octagon. Holm was matched up with Bethe Correia on UFC Fight Night 111. On this particular evening, Correia decided to taunt the former champion numerous times throughout the fight, yet she would soon regret her decision. Correia had little to no control of the fight on the feet, yet she periodically stopped to tease Holly. In round 3, Holly landed her trademark question mark kick that caught Correia perfectly on the temple. As she fell to one knee, Holly connected with a left hook that finished the job. It should go without saying, but you should never taunt someone who can strike like Holm. Number 8. Blanchfield vs. Victoria Leonardo. Back before Blanchfield was smashing through opponents in the UFC with her Khabib-like wrestling and devastating ground and pound game, she first came to the attention of fans back in 2020. During Invicta FC 39, Blanchfield was matched up against a respectable opponent in Victoria Leonardo and would go on to finish her by way of a brutal knockout. Blanchfield was only 20 years old when she shared the octagon with Leonardo, and while the first round of the fight was evenly matched, it wouldn't go any further than the second. Blanchfield bombarded Leonardo with strikes and followed it up with a powerful head kick that sent her opponent crumbling to the canvas. A few seconds later, the fight was over. Since then, Blanchfield has gone on to become one of the best fighters in the UFC's flyweight division and is currently on a 6-fight win streak with the promotion. Number 7. Ronda Rousey vs. Bethe Correia. While we aren't trying to pick on Bethe Correia in this list, she does make it easier said than done. Back in 2015, she earned her first and only title shot against the then unstoppable force in women's MMA, Ronda Rousey. The pair met at UFC 190, and fans knew this would be a war, as Correia had previously spent a great deal of time trash-talking Rousey in the lead-up to the fight. Correia did this in an attempt to force Rousey to strike instead of using her elite skills in grappling. But unfortunately, Correia didn't realize that Ronda's striking could be just as devastating as her judo. The champ brought the heat to the challenger, landing an array of hard shots in the first round. After only 34 seconds, she put Correia face down on the canvas with a brutal right hand. Number 6. Kat Zingano vs. Amanda Nunes. Kat Zingano is one of the very few fighters to ever get the upper hand over the Brazilian warrior Amanda Nunes. The pair met inside the octagon at UFC 178, and Zingano put on a world-class performance. She used her impressive grappling skills to gain the upper hand in the fight and didn't hesitate to try and finish Nunes early. Time and time again, Zingano took the future champ to the ground and proceeded to land heavy shots from above. Just over a minute into the third round, Zingano managed to mount Nunes and fired off elbows to her opponent's face. After a few blows, the blood began running out of Nunes' head, and soon she was brutally finished. Number 5. Jessica Andrade vs. Karolina Kowalkiewicz. Jessica Andrade is one of the most powerful strikers in women's MMA. Often considered to have hands of steel, we've seen her brutally finish many opponents over the years, but none stick out quite like that of UFC 228. Here, the Brazilian faced off against the formidable Karolina Kowalkiewicz in a fight that wouldn't make it out of the first round. From the get-go, Andrade was throwing heavy shots, some of which broke through the guard of Karolina. While the Polish fighter did her best to fire back in the exchanges, she would eat a massive right overhand that collapsed her entire body, and she was out cold before she hit the ground. This finish is a perfect example of the power in Andrade's hands. Number 4. Amanda Nunes vs. Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey returned to the octagon in 2016, a year after her first UFC loss to Holm at UFC 193. Rousey believed she had a point to prove and hoped to show her fans she could become a champion again. However, standing in her way was Amanda Nunes, who'd recently claimed the bantamweight title. As the fight began, we immediately saw Nunes go to work and issued one of the greatest beatdowns we've ever witnessed inside the UFC's octagon. She connected strike after strike to the face of Rousey, but ultimately brutally finishing her. The most impressive fact about the fight was that she accomplished this in as little as 48 seconds. Many considered this one of the greatest knockouts in history, simply because of what Nunes was able to do to one of the greatest female fighters in the history of the sport. Number 3. Kat Zingano vs. Miesha Tate. Kat Zingano made her official UFC debut against the former Strikeforce champion Miesha Tate back in 2013. This fight was full of heavy exchanges from the beginning, as both competitors were out to prove they had what it takes to finish the other. Both landed huge shots throughout the fight, and Miesha was considerably better in the grappling department. In the third round, Zingano managed to stuff a takedown attempt by Tate and began unleashing an array of strikes. As Tate tried to get back to her feet, she was met with a huge knee to the face that dropped her to the ground. Zingano continued with brutal strikes to the head of Tate, forcing her again to try and get on her feet. But Zingano followed her and landed 3 more brutal knees to the face. Blood was now pouring from the nose of Tate, and she seemed clueless as to her whereabouts. Thankfully, the ref decided she was in no shape to continue. Number 2. Holm vs. Ronda Rousey. When Holm took on Ronda Rousey in 2015 at UFC 193, she was considered by many to be a massive underdog. Rousey'd been smashing her way through the women's bantamweight division and looked unstoppable. But what came to fruition was one of the greatest upsets in MMA history. Holmes put on an absolutely striking masterclass and finished the champion in the second round. Rousey had no clear answer for Holmes' technical skills and struggled to keep up with her movement and speed. A minute into the second round, Holmes fired off a head kick that brutally finished Rousey, to the surprise of fans around the world. To this day, it remains one of the craziest knockouts in women's MMA. Number 1. Amanda Nunes vs. Holm. There's no doubt Amanda Nunes should be considered the most dominant fighter in the history of women's MMA. She successfully defended her bantamweight title against some of the best women to ever step foot in the cage over a dominant 8-year period. One unlucky competitor to face the full wrath of the Brazilian was the former champion Holm, who shared the octagon with Nunes in 2019. While many thought we'd be in for a 5-round brawl between 2 elite strikers, the fight wouldn't make it out of the first round. Nunes slowly built up a rhythm in the initial stages of the fight, avoiding Holm's oblique kicks and firing back with overhand counters. 1 minute before the end of the first round, Nunes beautifully executed a brutal head kick that connected with Holm's temple, and she immediately collapsed to the canvas. Nunes followed up with shots, but the fight was long over, and she once again spectacularly retained her title. And that's our picks for the craziest knockouts in women's MMA. Let us know what you think about the video in the comments section.